The heavy mahogany doors of Committee Room 2154 in the Rayburn House office building burst open with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Every camera swiveled toward the figure frozen in the doorway. Karoline Leavitt, at 27. The youngest White House press secretary in modern history, stood paralyzed at the threshold. Her signature confidence had evaporated. The navy blazer that usually projected unwavering authority now hung wrinkled on her frame, betraying a sleepless night of panic. Her knuckles were white as she gripped a manila folder that might contain her salvation, or her complete destruction. At the witness table sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, her expression carved from stone. The Texas Democrat and former prosecutor had filed an $80 million defamation lawsuit just 72 hours earlier, a legal nuclear bomb that threatened to obliterate Leavitt's meteoric rise before her 28th birthday. The air crackled with the kind of electric tension that precedes a political earthquake. When Levit finally spoke, her voice cracked, a sound no one had ever heard from the woman who'd stared down hostile reporters for 2 years. "I need to speak with you," she whispered, the words barely audible yet somehow carrying to every corner of the packed chamber. The room fell into cathedral silence. C-SPAN cameras rolled. Reporters lifted their phones with predatory anticipation. What unfolded next would explode across the internet within minutes, generating tens of millions of views and fundamentally altering the trajectory of American politics. This wasn't just another Washington dust-up. This was the collision of two rising stars from opposite sides of the political universe. One representing polished conservative ambition, the other embodying progressive grit forged in Dallas courtrooms. Their confrontation would expose the rot at the heart of the political machine and force a reckoning with truths that powerful people had spent millions to bury. But before we witness the moment that shattered careers and sparked a revolution, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. This story goes deeper than anyone imagined, revealing a web of corruption that reaches into the highest levels of power. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, because what happened in that committee room sent shockwaves from Washington to Tokyo, fundamentally changing how politics is played in America. The hearing that followed became the most watched congressional moment in a generation. Here's how it all unraveled. To understand why this confrontation stunned the nation, you need to know the remarkable journeys that brought these two women to this explosive moment. Karoline Leavitt's ascent was nothing short of meteoric. Born and raised in New Hampshire, she embodied the American dream with a Gen Z twist. From college intern to the White House podium in less than 5 years, she'd become the conservative movement's brightest young star. Her small-town authenticity, combined with razor-sharp intelligence and an uncanny ability to deflect hostile questions, made her a social media sensation. Leavitt had earned her stripes in the trenches of New Hampshire politics before catching the attention of national Republican strategists. Her breakout moment came during a particularly brutal press briefing when she dismantled a veteran correspondent's loaded question with such surgical precision that the clip went viral, earning her the nickname, the Gen Z Gladiator. Conservative media hailed her as the future of the movement, young, articulate, and unflappable under pressure. Her daily performances in the James S. Brady press briefing room were masterclasses in political theater. Day after day, she transformed hostile questioning into conservative talking points, turning defense into offense with a smile that never wavered. She'd become the administration's most valuable asset, the fresh face that made their message palatable to younger voters. But Leavitt's rapid rise had come at a cost. Sources close to her revealed she'd grown increasingly uncomfortable with some of the positions she was required to defend. Friends noticed she'd become distant, isolated by the demands of a job that required her to be on 24 hours a day. The pressure was immense and cracks were beginning to show. Jasmine Crockett's path to Congress was forged in fire. Raised by a single mother in St. Louis who worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table, Crockett learned early that nothing comes easy. She'd put herself through law school, spending a decade afterward paying off crushing student debt while building a reputation as one of Dallas's most formidable public defenders. In the courtroom, Crockett was legendary. She won cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch, defending clients that the system had written off. Her cross-examinations were surgical strikes that exposed lies and revealed truth with devastating precision. She didn't just ask questions. She dissected witnesses like a pathologist performing an autopsy on deception itself. When Crockett made the leap to Congress, she brought that prosecutorial edge to Capitol Hill. Her questioning during committee hearings became must-see television. She had an uncanny ability to cut through political spin and force witnesses to confront uncomfortable realities. Where other members grandstanded, Crockett investigated. Where others sought sound bites, she pursued justice. The Congresswoman's rise represented something threatening to the established order. She was brilliant, fearless, and absolutely incorruptible. Her growing influence with progressive voters and her ability to dominate news cycles made her a target for conservative operatives who specialized in character assassination. The collision between these two forces had been building for months. It started with subtle digs during press briefings. Levit would deflect questions about policy by questioning the motives of Democratic members. Crockett would respond on social media with surgical precision, calling out the administration's lies without mentioning Levit by name. The tension escalated when Crockett began investigating irregularities in administration contracts, following money trails that led uncomfortably close to major Republican donors. Her committee work was thorough, methodical, and absolutely devastating to several key figures in the conservative movement. Then came the Fox News interview that changed everything. Appearing on Tucker Tonight, Levit was asked about Crockett's investigation into defense contracting. Instead of sticking to policy, Levit went personal, suggesting that Crockett's designer lifestyle revealed how out of touch she was with working families. "I mean, look at her," Levit had said with practiced casualness. "Designer handbags, expensive suits. This from someone who claims to represent working people. Maybe she should spend less time shopping and more time actually understanding the policies she's criticizing." The comment was designed to be a throwaway line, the kind of personal attack that typically gets lost in the news cycle. But Levit had made a critical error. She'd attacked Crockett's family without knowing the full story. The handbags Crockett carried weren't designer pieces. They were gifts from her late grandmother, a seamstress who had saved for years to buy her granddaughter something beautiful for her first day of law school. The expensive suits were purchased at outlet stores or donated by a local women's professional organization that helped young lawyers dress for success. More importantly, Levit's attack was based on fabricated opposition research. The photos used to support the designer lifestyle narrative had been deliberately mislabeled, the price tags inflated, the context stripped away. It was a lie from top to bottom, carefully constructed to destroy Crockett's credibility with working-class voters. Within 48 hours, Crockett's legal team had traced the false information back to its source and filed the $80 million lawsuit. The complaint didn't just target Levit, it named the entire ecosystem of operatives, donors, and media figures who had coordinated the attack. The stakes couldn't have been higher. For Levit, it meant potential financial ruin and the end of a brilliant career. For Crockett, it was about something bigger, using the courts to finally hold accountable a system that had weaponized lies for political gain. Neither woman knew that the other possessed information that could destroy careers, end political futures, and expose corruption at the highest levels of American government. What neither the packed committee room nor the millions watching at home understood was that this confrontation had been orchestrated from the shadows by some of the most powerful figures in Republican politics. The attack on Jasmine Crockett wasn't spontaneous. It was the product of a sophisticated war room operation that treated character assassination like a military campaign. 3 weeks before Levit's fateful Fox News appearance, a private meeting had taken place in a luxury suite at the Hay Adams Hotel, just blocks from the White House. The gathering included Richard Blackstone, a billionaire defense contractor whose companies held billions in government contracts. Steve Hoffman, the administration's senior advisor and strategic mastermind, and 6 other major Republican donors whose combined net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations. The subject of their discussion, the growing threat posed by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. "She's gotten too close," Blackstone had said, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany table. "Her investigation into the Meridian defense contracts is about to expose relationships we've spent years building. If she connects the dots between the Syria reconstruction deals and our donor network, we're looking at criminal liability." Hoffman had nodded grimly. Crockett's subpoena power and prosecutorial background made her uniquely dangerous. Unlike other Democratic members who were content to make speeches and generate headlines, she actually followed the money. Her forensic approach to oversight was dismantling carefully constructed layers of legal protection. "The usual approaches won't work," admitted Marcus Chen, a veteran opposition researcher whose firm had destroyed dozens of political careers. "She's clean. No financial irregularities, no personal scandals, no questionable associations. Her background is bulletproof." That's when Hoffman had smiled his predatory smile. "Then we don't attack her record. We attack her character. We make her the villain in a story about hypocrisy and elite privilege. We turn her strength, her background, into a weapon against her." The strategy was diabolical in its simplicity. They would fabricate evidence of a luxurious lifestyle that contradicted Crockett's working-class image. Expensive handbags would be identified in photos, designer suit labels would be enhanced in social media posts, and a narrative of hypocrisy would be carefully seeded across conservative media. "We need a messenger," Blackstone had said. "Someone young, credible, with access to the biggest platforms." Hoffman's eyes had lit up. "Karoline Leavitt. She's perfect. Young, articulate, and desperate to prove herself. She'll deliver whatever talking points we give her without asking too many questions." The conspiracy required precision timing and coordination across multiple platforms. Digital Fortress, a shadowy opposition research firm, was hired to create the fabricated dossier on Crockett's supposed extravagant lifestyle. Social media influencers were fed talking points about limousine liberals and fake progressives. Conservative media personalities received background briefings that presented the manufactured evidence as legitimate investigative journalism. The cost was staggering. $2.3 million funneled through shell companies and dark money groups to ensure no direct connection could be traced back to the donors. It was democracy's vulnerability laid bare. The ability of unlimited money to create alternate realities and destroy lives through coordinated deception. Levit, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the machinery working around her. She received her briefing materials through normal channels, trusting that the opposition research had been properly vetted. The talking points arrived with official letterhead and professional presentation, indistinguishable from legitimate political intelligence. The night before her Fox News appearance, Leavitt had practiced her lines in the mirror of her Georgetown apartment. The attack felt uncomfortable. She'd always preferred policy arguments to personal shots, but Hoffman had been insistent. "This is about credibility," he'd told her during their prep session. "Crockett is trying to position herself as the voice of working families while living like a socialite. The American people deserve to know about the hypocrisy." When Tucker Carlson teed up the question about Crockett's investigation, Leavitt delivered the prepared attack with practiced precision. But even as the words left her mouth, she felt a nagging unease. Something about the whole thing felt wrong, though she couldn't identify exactly what. The response was immediate and devastating. The clip of Leavitt questioning Crockett's designer lifestyle exploded across social media, generating millions of views and fierce debate. Conservative outlets praised Leavitt for calling out elite hypocrisy, while progressive voices condemned the attack as racist and sexist. But Crockett's response was unlike anything the operatives had anticipated. Instead of issuing a defensive statement or engaging in a Twitter war, she went silent. Her communications director simply said the Congresswoman was reviewing her options, a phrase that sent chills through Hoffman's war room. Behind the scenes, Crockett was doing what she did best, building a case. Her legal team, led by former federal prosecutors, began methodically tracing the origins of the fabricated evidence. They discovered the doctored photos, the inflated price tags, the manufactured timeline that created a false narrative of extravagance. More importantly, they found the money trail. Digital Fortress had been sloppy with their financial records, and Crockett's investigators followed the payments back through a maze of shell companies and dark money groups to their ultimate source. The same billionaire donors who held defense contracts worth billions. The legal filing was a masterpiece of prosecutorial precision. The $80 million lawsuit didn't just allege defamation. It laid out a comprehensive conspiracy that included racketeering, campaign finance violations, and fraud. The defendants weren't limited to Levitt. They included Hoffman, Blackstone, the donors who funded the operation, and the media personalities who knowingly spread false information. For Levitt, the lawsuit was a complete shock. She'd delivered what she thought were legitimate talking points, only to discover she'd been the weapon in a sophisticated influence operation. The woman who'd built her career on credibility and trustworthiness suddenly found herself at the center of a scandal that threatened to destroy everything she'd worked for. The revelation that she'd been used as a puppet by powerful men who'd never respected her intelligence or judgment was perhaps more devastating than the legal jeopardy. Internal communications revealed that Hoffman and his allies had always viewed her as expendable, a young, attractive face who could deliver their messaging without asking inconvenient questions. "She's useful for now," read one leaked email from Hoffman to Blackstone. "Young, ambitious, and naive enough to take the fall when needed. Keep her in front of the cameras. If things go south, she's expendable." The word expendable became a trending hashtag within hours, as young staffers across Washington shared their own stories of being used and discarded by powerful politicians. The expendable generation movement exposed a pattern of abuse that transcended party lines, a system that chewed up idealistic young people and spat them out the moment they became inconvenient. As the scandal metastasized, Levitt found herself completely isolated. The White House Communications Office began distancing itself from her statements. Hoffman stopped taking her calls. The donors who'd once praised her sharp performances suddenly acted as if they'd never heard her name. The press, sensing blood in the water, began digging deeper into the story. Investigative reporters uncovered the extent of the coordination between the administration, donors, and conservative media. The fabricated dossier on Crockett was just one example of a broader pattern of information warfare that had been used against dozens of Democratic politicians. Public opinion began shifting rapidly. What had initially seemed like a typical political food fight was revealed as something far more sinister, a systematic attempt to undermine democratic institutions through coordinated deception and character assassination. The pressure on Levitt became unbearable. Death threats arrived daily. Her apartment building was besieged by protesters and reporters. Former allies and conservative media began calling for her resignation, portraying her as either complicit in the conspiracy or too incompetent to be trusted with sensitive information. It was in this context of complete professional and personal isolation that Levitt made the desperate decision to seek a direct meeting with Jasmine Crockett. She'd lost everything: her reputation, her allies, her future, and faced the prospect of spending decades paying off a legal judgment that would follow her forever. The manila folder she carried contained evidence that could potentially shift blame to the men who'd orchestrated the attack. But it also contained information that could make her situation even worse. Recorded conversations that proved she'd known some of the talking points were questionable but had delivered them anyway out of ambition and fear. As she stood frozen in that committee room doorway, Karoline Leavitt represented something profound: the human cost of a political system that had become divorced from truth, accountability, and basic human decency. She was both perpetrator and victim, aggressor and casualty in a war where lies were weapons, and young idealists were expendable ammunition. The confrontation that followed would force a reckoning not just between two individuals, but between competing visions of American democracy itself. Jasmine Crockett remained perfectly still as Levitt approached the witness table. her dark eyes tracking every movement with the calculating precision of a prosecutor who'd cornered a key witness. The purple suit she wore wasn't just a fashion choice. It was a statement of power, authority, and unshakable resolve. "Miss Crockett," Leavitt began, her voice stronger than her initial whisper but still trembling with barely controlled panic. "I know you have every reason not to listen to me, but there are things we need to discuss before this lawsuit destroys innocent people." The calculated emphasis on innocent people wasn't lost on anyone in the room. It was a classic deflection technique. Frame the issue around collateral damage rather than the central crime, but if Leavitt expected sympathy, she'd badly misjudged her audience. Crockett's silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, each second building tension like a tightening guitar string. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the cold authority of a judge delivering a verdict. "PG people who thought they could destroy a black woman's reputation for political points," she said, each word precisely enunciated. "People who assumed I wouldn't fight back because I was supposed to be grateful for my position and stay quiet." The racial undertone hit the room like a physical force. Leavitt's face flushed, whether from anger, shame, or recognition, no one could tell. "That's not what this is about," Leavitt protested weakly, clutching her manila folder like a life preserver. "I know exactly what this is about," Crockett replied, rising slowly from her chair. The movement was deliberate, predatory, like a big cat preparing to strike. "You thought you could punch down at me, use the angry black woman stereotype, paint me as ungrateful, out of touch, hypocritical. You thought I'd just take it and move on." She began walking around the witness table, her heels clicking against the marble floor with metronomic precision. "But here's what you didn't understand about me, Miss Leavitt. I've been underestimated my entire life. In law school, they said I was too aggressive. In the courtroom, they said I was too emotional. In Congress, they say I'm too confrontational." Crockett stopped directly in front of Leavitt, close enough that the cameras could capture every micro-expression. "What they really mean is that I refuse to play by rules designed to keep people like me quiet. I don't just defend myself, I attack. And when someone lies about my family, about my grandmother who worked her fingers to the bone to give me something beautiful, I don't just get even. I get ahead." Leavitt lifted her manila folder with shaking hands. "I have information," she said desperately. "Documents that prove I wasn't acting alone. People you need to know about." "Is that a threat?" Crockett's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the packed chamber. "Are you trying to blackmail me in front of Congress and the American people?" "No, Leavitt's voice cracked. "This is complicated. There are powerful people involved. People who used me." Crockett laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Complicated? Let me simplify it for you. You lied. You were caught. Now you face consequences. The only complicated part is watching you try to blame everyone except yourself." Committee Chairman Jim Jordan finally attempted to intervene. "Ladies, perhaps we should—" "No recess." Crockett cut him off without breaking eye contact with Leavitt. "Miss Leavitt came here uninvited, interrupted a congressional hearing, and demanded my attention. If she has something to say, she can say it in public. No backroom deals, no private negotiations. If she wants to beg, she can beg in the light." The word "beg" hung in the air like a challenge. Cameras zoomed in on Leavitt's face, capturing the moment of decision that would define both women's legacies. For a heartbeat, the old Karoline Leavitt appeared, the confident press secretary who'd dominated briefing rooms and viral moments. Her jaw tightened, her spine straightened, and for just an instant, she looked ready to fight back with the same sharp intelligence that had made her famous. But the moment passed as quickly as it came. The weight of her isolation, the impossibility of her situation, and the truth of her expendability crashed over her like a wave. "Fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You want me to beg?" What happened next shocked everyone in the room, including Crockett herself. Without warning, without ceremony, the youngest White House press secretary in modern history dropped to her knees in front of a congressional committee. The reaction was instantaneous. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. Reporters scrambled to their feet. Someone in the gallery gasped so loudly it echoed off the chamber walls. The image would be frozen in time, the symbol of an entire political generation's vulnerability and desperation. "Please," Levitt said, looking up at Crockett with tears forming in her eyes. "I'm begging you. Don't destroy innocent people for my mistakes." She began reading names from her crumpled folder, her voice breaking with each one. Sarah Martinez, an intern 3 weeks on the job. Tom Bradley, a communications assistant whose daughter needs his insurance for medical therapy. Maria Santos, a scheduler supporting her elderly parents. These people didn't write my words. They don't deserve to lose everything because I was stupid and ambitious. Crockett stared down at her, clearly thrown by the theatrical display. The power dynamic had shifted in a way no one had anticipated, not toward forgiveness, but toward something more complex and disturbing. "Get up," Crockett said quietly, her voice carrying a different edge now. "Not until you stand up right now, or I walk out of this room and let the courts handle everything," Crockett commanded, her prosecutorial authority cutting through Levitt's performance. "You don't get to humiliate yourself and make me the villain. You don't get to turn your career suicide into my moral failing." Leavitt rose slowly, her knees unsteady, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The manila folder was wrinkled and torn from where she'd gripped it. "You want to know what's truly pathetic?" Crockett asked, ensuring every word carried to the cameras. "It's not that you just debased yourself in front of the nation. It's that you only care about consequences now that they're hitting you personally. Where was this concern for innocent people when you were spreading lies about my grandmother? Where was your humanity when you were turning my family into a punchline for political points?" Levitt's response was barely audible. "I was doing my job." "Your job," Crockett repeated, her voice rising until it filled the chamber, "was to weaponize shame against a woman who dedicated her life to fighting for people like you. Your job was to take my grandmother's love and turn it into ammunition. You accepted that job gladly because you thought it would advance your career." The committee room felt like an arena now, with everyone understanding they were witnessing a defining moment in American politics. This wasn't just about a lawsuit or personal grievances, it was about the soul of democracy itself. "But here's what you still don't understand," Crockett continued, her voice growing colder with each word. "This was never about you. You were just the weapon they used. While you're here begging for mercy, the men who actually orchestrated this attack are already planning how to destroy the next person who threatens their power. You're not the villain in this story, Miss Leavitt. You're just another victim who chose to become complicit rather than fight back." The truth of those words hit Leavitt like a physical blow. As if on cue, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. She glanced at it with trembling hands, and whatever she saw there drained the last bit of color from her face. "Let me guess," Crockett said with cold satisfaction. "The White House wants to see you immediately. They're about to make you the scapegoat for this entire disaster. The same people who fed you those lies are now ready to sacrifice you to save themselves." Leavitt nodded, unable to speak. "And you'll let them," Crockett continued mercilessly, "because that's what expendable people do. They take the blame, accept the punishment, and disappear quietly so the real power brokers can continue their games." Within minutes of Leavitt's public humiliation, the digital wildfire had already begun. Expendable press secretary exploded across every social media platform, generating over 50 million interactions in the first hour alone. The image of America's youngest press secretary on her knees before a black congresswoman became an instant symbol of power, accountability, and the brutal realities of Washington politics. Major news networks dropped their regular programming for wall-to-wall coverage. CNN's Anderson Cooper called it the most stunning congressional moment since Watergate. Fox News found itself in the impossible position of defending their own talking points while distancing themselves from the woman who delivered them. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow devoted her entire show to dissecting the conspiracy that had created the moment. But the real earthquake was happening behind the scenes in Washington's corridors of power. By 3 p.m., senior advisor Steve Hoffman was in emergency meetings with White House counsel, frantically trying to contain the legal and political damage. His phone rang constantly with calls from panicked donors, media allies, and political operatives who suddenly found themselves exposed in Crockett's lawsuit. Richard Blackstone, the billionaire defense contractor at the center of the conspiracy, issued a terse statement through his lawyers denying any wrongdoing. But investigative reporters were already digging into his financial records, following the money trail that connected his business interests to the administration's defense contracts and the fabricated opposition research on Crockett. The most dramatic development came when Digital Fortress, the shadowy research firm that had created the fake dossier, suddenly announced it was cooperating fully with all relevant authorities. Industry insiders knew this was code for a complete document dump designed to shift blame away from the firm and onto their clients. Inside the White House, chaos reigned. The communications office that Levit had once dominated stood empty, its carefully choreographed messaging operation grinding to a halt. Deputy press secretaries huddled in closed-door meetings, trying to figure out how to address a scandal that implicated the entire senior staff. The president himself maintained strategic silence, but sources close to the administration revealed a furious private response. "How the hell did we let a 27-year-old bring down our entire messaging operation?" he reportedly demanded during an emergency cabinet meeting. But the story was bigger than any single administration. Crockett's lawsuit had exposed a systematic network of political operatives, dark money donors, and complicit media figures who had weaponized disinformation for years. Other Democratic politicians began coming forward with similar stories of coordinated attacks based on fabricated evidence. Within 48 hours, 3 more major lawsuits had been filed by politicians who'd been targeted by the same network. The legal strategy was clear: use the courts to hold accountable a system that had operated in the shadows for too long, protected by the assumption that public figures had no recourse against coordinated character assassination. The media landscape began fracturing along unexpected lines. Several prominent conservative commentators who had amplified the false stories about Crockett issued public apologies and announced they were implementing new fact-checking procedures. Others doubled down, portraying the lawsuits as an attack on free speech and political discourse. The most surprising development came from an unexpected source: young Republican staffers. Inspired by the Expendable Generation hashtag, dozens of GOP operatives began sharing their own stories of being used as disposable weapons in political warfare. The revelations painted a picture of a political culture that regularly sacrificed its youngest and most idealistic members to protect powerful interests. Sarah Martinez, the intern Levit had named during her plea, became an unlikely symbol of the collateral damage caused by political machinations. In a viral TikTok video, she described the terror of waking up to find her name associated with a massive scandal, despite having no knowledge of the conspiracy. Her genuine fear and confusion humanized the abstract concept of innocent people that politicians often invoked. The intersection of race, gender, and power that the confrontation had exposed sparked intense national debate. Academic experts on political communication noted that Crockett's calculated use of the beg demand had forced a powerful white woman into a position of public submission, a reversal of historical power dynamics that resonated deeply with communities that had experienced systemic oppression. Progressive activists hailed Crockett as a hero who had finally held the political establishment accountable. Conservative voices were more divided, with some praising Levit's apparent remorse while others criticized her for betraying the administration that had elevated her. The financial markets reacted swiftly to the unfolding scandal. Defense contracting stocks, particularly those connected to Blackstone's empire, experienced significant volatility as investors tried to assess the potential legal and regulatory consequences. Several major donors quietly began distancing themselves from political activities, spooked by the prospect of personal liability for their opposition research investments. International media coverage was equally intense, with European outlets drawing parallels to their own political scandals involving disinformation and media manipulation. The story became a case study in how democratic institutions could be corrupted by unlimited money and coordinated deception. Perhaps most significantly, the scandal prompted calls for comprehensive campaign finance reform and new regulations on political communications. Democratic leaders announced plans for hearings on dark money influence operations, while some Republicans quietly supported efforts to increase transparency in political spending. The human cost was mounting as well. Leavitt had effectively become unemployable in Republican politics, her public humiliation making her toxic to future employers. Her personal social media accounts were flooded with both sympathy and condemnation, forcing her to retreat from public view entirely. Meanwhile, Crockett's national profile soared. Fundraising for her upcoming re-election campaign exploded, with small-dollar donations pouring in from across the country. Progressive organizations began courting her for higher office, recognizing that her prosecutorial approach to congressional oversight had proven uniquely effective. The confrontation had achieved something unprecedented. It had forced a real-time reckoning with the machinery of political destruction that operated behind the scenes of American democracy. The question now was whether the accountability moment would lead to lasting change or simply more sophisticated methods of character assassination. As the dust settled on the most explosive congressional hearing in recent memory, two women found themselves forever changed by a confrontation that neither had anticipated. 6 months later, Karoline Leavitt sat in a small coffee shop in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, far from the bright lights and relentless pressure of Washington. The $80 million lawsuit had been settled for $45 million, with the bulk of the judgment falling on Steve Hoffman, Richard Blackstone, and the network of operatives who had orchestrated the conspiracy. Leavitt's portion was manageable. Her cooperation with federal investigators and public testimony had earned her a degree of legal protection. She'd found unexpected peace in obscurity. Working as a communications consultant for local nonprofits, she discovered the satisfaction of using her skills for organizations actually trying to help people rather than destroy them. The viral moment of her kneeling before Congress had initially felt like the death of everything she'd worked for, but it had also freed her from a system that had never truly valued her as anything more than an attractive spokesperson. "I was so afraid of being expendable that I made myself complicit," she reflected in a rare interview months later. "Sometimes the most liberating thing that can happen is having your worst fears realized. I lost everything I thought mattered and discovered what actually does." Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, had channeled her victory into a broader campaign for government accountability. The success of her lawsuit had inspired similar legal challenges across the country, creating a new model for holding political operatives accountable for coordinated disinformation campaigns. "We proved that lies have consequences," she said during a speech at Harvard Law School. "We showed that even the most powerful people in America aren't above the law when they weaponize falsehoods against democracy itself." The confrontation between a desperate press secretary and an unforgiving Congresswoman had exposed the brutal machinery of modern politics. But it had also demonstrated something more hopeful, that truth, when backed by courage and legal precision, could still triumph over coordinated deception. In the end, the moment that seemed to destroy Karoline Leavitt had actually saved her, from a system that would have used her until she was no longer useful, then discarded her without a second thought. And the cold response that made Jasmine Crockett appear merciless had actually been an act of mercy, forcing accountability in a town that had forgotten the meaning of the word. Sometimes the most devastating confrontations create the space for the most profound healing. Sometimes being brought to your knees is the first step towards learning how to truly stand tall. If this story of power, accountability, and redemption moved you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This is the kind of political drama that reminds us why transparency and truth matter more than partisan loyalty. Drop a comment letting us know what you think. Did Crockett go too far, or was her response exactly what Washington needed? Share this video, because stories like this deserve to be told, and the powerful people who prefer to operate in shadows need to know that the light of accountability can reach anywhere. The truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary, and sometimes it takes someone willing to kneel in front of Congress to remind us all how to stand up for what's right.